This is actually a great opportunity for everyone, not just those who are here, but also the rest of the school as well. So, Mr. Taiga.
Thank you. Starting off introduction, I've given the history of Kenya as a country, its geographical location, the population it has, and the income per capita and the GDP. So when you look at the background of Kenya, you'll find that much of it, as I put it there, it's 85% of Texas state here. That's the entire country. And that has a population of 40 million people, a GDP of 58 billion, and an income per capita of 1,700. So I'm trying to give a view that actually the majority of the population is engulfed in poverty, given that part of the land, or it's only 8% of that land that is arable. So then the ruling class is just a minority group that has taken the power, that has taken the control, that has taken the wealthy of the nation. And this has actually perpetuated its hold on power. The moment people acquire this wealth, the moment these leaders acquire the power, then they use the same to hold on to power for a long time, and in the end, the person who suffers is a citizen, as whatever consequences they inflict on them in terms of governance, injustice, and torture. I've given an overview of the faces of injustices in Kenya. I think from your from the documentary, they try to touch on the pre-colonial repression that occurred in the period 1960s and 1965, where we had actually the Kenyan struggle for independence. And before that independence, there was a repression instituted by the colonial government, and that was under the British rule. The kind of repression that they enforced on people was forced labor, evacuations, relocations from settled lands, detentions, killings of those advocates of change. Then we went to the second phase after independence, where the new rulers took over. The masters of the Mau Mau now, who were struggling, after taking over the power, it became a new class of rulers who became grabbers of land. They now took a chance. They saw that was a chance now to acquire more land, and they started instituting assassinations for those they perceived were detractors to their rule. In the third phase, we had the Khan regime that took over power and extended its dictatorial tendencies and machinations. It became so ruthless that anybody who was opposed to it had to be arrested, taken to detentions, tortured. You saw in the documentary the house, the common house that they were using, called Nyayo torture chambers. On the outside, you see it's a very beautiful skyscraper, but deep in it, there was a lot of damage that was being done to the citizens. So that was done under the regime of Kanu, under Moi, who was the president by then. And they did really had massive arrests of people they perceived were opposed to the regime. And these people they were codenamed Mwakenya. So a number of people went through Nyayo torture chambers, were Mwakenya, kind of codenamed as Mwakenya group. Then we had the Fera group that came within the period of 1994 and 1999, which also had a similar repression. Then now the current government that took over power, that is phase 4, it took over power under the auspices of NAC and PNU, and it extended its tact of repression. It changed the tact, whereby instead of now taking people into detentions, they now they allowed the police departments to execute people through massive extrajudicial killings. And there was also a lot of rivalry in terms of the militia groups who came up, some kind of political lineage to the political class. And we had a lot of formation of the militia groups, which also instituted a lot of mayhem and anarchy within the Kenyan territory. Now the thematic groups that actually have gone through all these experiences. We had the Nyayo torture survivors who are codenamed Mwakenya. We had the alleged Fera group that was in a small area called Mount Elgon. Then we had the survivors of Wagala massacres. We had massacres which was carried out by the military in one section of Kenya, which was very massive, done at once, and so many people were killed. We had also the Turkana massacres. Then we had also the families of those people who were politically assassinated. And given the recent conflicts that occurred, we had a lot of post-election violence that resulted into so many displacements of IDPs. Of these IDPs are the internally displaced persons. I hope the documentary you saw a lot of tents all over Kenya. And as I talk now, we still have those people in those camps. Now, what does the Kenyan law, what are the Kenyan laws on torture? Kenya has some laws on torture. It's also a signatory to the international conventions. So, though it has been a signatory to these international conventions, we expect that much of it, of what they sign there as treaties, should be domesticated in our local laws, but that is never done. So we still have a problem that the Kenyan ruling class only go to sign those treaties, but when it comes to real application of the treaties, is never done domestically. The word torture has its definition. As it is derived from the Latin word called tortus, which means twisting. Torture refers to deliberate infliction of physical and mental pain by somebody in authority. So whoever is in authority and carries out, wants to get information or does want to ensure that whoever is being held confesses to their will, then they use that mechanism to get information out of one. So that definition gives it the perspective that not everything that happens, possibly domestic violence, could not be torture. It could be something else. Child abuse could not be torture. So that definition actually narrows torture to people who are in authority. Torture is outlawed internationally. It has even been outlawed in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenants, and the Rome Statutes of International Criminal Court, even the African Charter. So we have these laws in place, but when it comes to real application, we don't see that happening. That's just a continuation of the laws on prohibition of torture. Now, integrated action by the community when it comes to the suffering, the atrocities, the conflicts they are undergoing. What steps as a community do they use to ensure that they have a healing process that can enable them come back to their normal lifestyle? So I've given it the approach of at least people feel when the torturers are apprehended, they feel there is that satisfaction that actually impunity has been reduced. But when it comes to no arrests of these perpetrators, people have a feeling that something is still amiss. So we also have, there is a demand for the better healing process of reparation. Reparation is a holistic it's a holistic process of demanding for compensation, restitution, and possibly ensuring that the person who has really been tortured gets an apology from the perpetrator. And then we have also the move to initiate the psychosocial healing process among the community, and so get the feedback. By starting this process, we intend to see how does it impact on the community who have really suffered using minimal resources. We encourage possibly a process whereby within the community itself, they have to initiate some kind of a process that can take them back, that can make them regain their lost, possibly glory. And that's this kind of process that we do apply. We initiate processes of rituals. There are some communities that will wish to have rituals, to perform certain rituals to enable them forget about the past and come to the reality of looking at the future and how they can approach this future. Then there has also been a call to ensure that there is a domestication of the Convention against these international laws, so that whatever treaties are signed, they are applied, or there is an application on the ground. The effects of the effects and consequences of historical injustices. We have had these injustices that have been inflicted on the community. They have got its own effect. And these effects may be long-lasting unless an intervention is done to ensure that there is a changing process. For instance, the sequel. Sequel is the after effects of torture, the traumatic experiences one has undergone. The consequences arising from torture again and other conflicts include the psychological effects on the community. where we have culture of fear, distrust, and despondency, culture of apathy. And then we also have the physical effects, where we have real injuries, we have death and maiming of one, and also the family breakups and property destroyed. And so to the type of injustices that are done, which is rape, murder, extrajudicial killings, the types of torture, which includes beatings, deprivation of food and sleep, electric shocks, using water to a mass one, sexual abuse, mock execution, detentions without trial, and so on. Societal trauma and its sequel, a conceptual summary. Now, causes of societal trauma include the natural disasters. We have the natural disasters, we have the man-made disasters, we have the symbolical social revolution, violent conflicts. All these contribute to a society experiencing some trauma. Stress and trauma go hand in hand. And I know nearly all of us experience stress in one way or another. And stress is a human physical and psychological response to outside forces that disturb the normal equilibrium of everyday life. This happens daily among the human beings. Now, from the Kenyan perspective, we have thought of coming up with remedies for transitional justice. And we've thought of one step of establishing the Truth Commission, which you saw on the documentary. Then there has also been a push for reforms, for institutional reforms. This constitutional reform has been on and off, and Kenyans have not had a constitution, a changed constitution or a reformed constitution for some time. So there has been that push to ensure that better laws are put into place so that we don't have repeated violations of human rights. Then there is impunity that has been going on in Kenya, and there has been that call to call the international court to come and take over so that it may be able to prosecute those who have committed violations against humanity. What are the current concerns among the citizens? Citizens feel there is a lot of gross human rights violations and the neglect of the victims' issues. And there has also been an impunity, state of impunity, continuous impunity within the Kenyan system. Women's rights and gender-based injustice have been common. Trauma, psychological distresses to victims who have really experienced it on and off has been there. And then we have also had unresolved massacres, political assassinations, extrajudicial killings and executions, which to date no person has been brought into book. We've had, from the population perspective, the Kenyan feel they should have, there's been an economic imbalances and the marginalization of certain communities. So that has also been an agenda put in the quest for a better reform system to enable them have a balance in terms of the resources. What is the remedy to conflicts by the community? The Kenyan community feel for them to have a better start for a healing process, then there should be a healing kind of relationship whereby there are groups which are established to facilitate or to support group of networks, of networks to engage in a psycho-social healing process. There is also that urge for safety. People feel for a better healing process, there has to be an assurance of safety in one way or another. And then acknowledgement, moving from a sense of dissociated trauma to acknowledge memory. And then the reconnection, being reconnected to the entire initial state they were in before. Okay, goals for social reconstruction. There has been an urge within the Kenyan community to ensure that they allow the rebuilding of human interaction that allows the society to function as it was before. Then to promote the community reconciliation, reconciliation within the community. The reconciliation has been initiated in a way that civil groups have created some kind of reconciliatory committee that go around using churches, using civil societies, going around to initiate reconciliation among the communities that have had a split or that experienced kind of that had a lot of hatred built within themselves. Then Kenyan perpetrators. We've had Kenyan perpetrators who have really caused a lot of damage and mayhem amongst the population. We've had so many groups which have come up, which are militia groups, and the government has so far done very little to ensure that these groups are not operating. We've over 10 groups which are reactive and which have been causing a lot of mayhem, and they have got their own kind of names that they use to institute a lot of atrocities. Then we have also the military and the police and the government administrators who have also contributed to the torture and conflicts within the country. Then we have also had a terrorist attack in the country, or terrorist threats, and also the bandits who come in one way or another, causing a lot of conflicts now and then. Sorry. Just wanted to finalize. No, the last bit. There was the last bit.
What's the last one? Way forward. Remedy?
Yeah, way forward.
Way forward.
Okay, the way forward. As a community, as a Kenyan community, we have been looking at it to ensure, because people have really suffered, people have gone through different traumatic experiences, and they need a lot of, they need adequate rehabilitation services to be provided. And then we have also been pressurizing the government to ensure that the state officially recognizes and acknowledges and apologizes to the victims for the past injustices. There has been an urge for a new democratic constitution. One was rejected, but there is still need to have another constitution that is accepted by all. So within that constitution, it may allow some reforms that are acceptable to all. Then there has also been the urge to have a Truth and Justice Reconciliation Commission. This has been on, and one has been formed. So as I talk now, it's on the way, trying to come up with its operation. Finally, in conclusion, the combination of conflicts in a society like Kenya creates a traumatized society that is prone to more disputes, violences, and wars. Hence, the need for psychosocial community healing and frequent sensitization to the community, and the state agents and perpetrators of tortures to avoid or limit conflicts of torture. Thank you for listening.
I think this will be a great opportunity, because I don't have a lot of questions, but I would actually prefer for you guys to ask the questions, because mine will be here till midnight. So if Mr. Taiga, are you okay? We'll ask him a question and answer, and
yeah.
Okay, I'll bring you some water too.
Yeah, sure.
I was wondering what the effects have been on the younger generations. Have you noticed that there have been more violence perpetrated by younger people because they're becoming desensitized from the things that they've seen throughout their lives? Or are they just as traumatized and staying out of the violence as the rest of the citizens?
Yeah. Given the Kenyan scenario, you see, wherever there is a lot of conflict in the country, usually the young generation is the one which is used to engage in a lot of distractions, in a lot of destructive activities. But the young generation only reacts to the system they feel is oppressive. But in this case, we are talking about people who have the authority to carry out the atrocities. So the young generation only comes in. They become victims of the same repression because they are trying to oppose the system that is trying to repress, to cause havoc to the entire society. So in essence, what they do is they are not really the perpetrators, they are not really the cause of the problem within the society, but they only react when it comes to, they see that the system is going wrong. So they have to come out and say, no, this system is doing the wrong thing. So we should do something to rectify it. Sure.
This goes along similar to that question, focusing on reconciliation of perpetrators as a way to heal. Do you think that that is serving as part of the field of the violence, instead of focusing on the perpetrators rather than on healing what we can control?
Pardon? Again?
Say it again. Okay. In focusing on the perpetrators as part of the healing process, instead who have not been prosecuted, do you think that that's helping to fuel the violence rather than help in the healing process?
It does help because in one way, the Kenyans feel that the moment impunity is stopped, there is that satisfaction among the people who feel they have been affected. But when they see these perpetrators going scot-free, there's no arrest. So even the healing process becomes a nightmare because people still feel you want us to heal, you want us to change, to come back to our lives, but here is somebody who really perpetrated us and nothing has been done to him. So there is that urge that impunity has also to be involved in the healing process. I mean, to take into account those who perpetuate these atrocities. Yeah. Sure.
I have a question in regards to the presentation that talked about the psychosocial healing process. And so could you tell me just a few of the certain rituals that take place to help the healing process for the communities? Some of the rituals that they do.
Sure. Now, in Kenya we have 42 tribes. And at least each tribe has got its own background. It has got its own custom. It has its own customs. It has got its own way of, wherever there is a conflict, wherever there is a calamity within the society, within their community, they have a way of bringing back the lost hopes. And maybe I could give one example of a ritual that may be performed. For instance, there are those who use religion. They could sing certain songs that are so emotional and that could bring some hope to the community. Then there are those who use different types of dances. And then there are those again who use a certain team of elders, say, to exorcise the bad spirits that brought the bad omen to the community. So in so doing, deep in them they feel it's a satisfaction. When these rituals are performed, at least there will be a change. They won't experience a similar occurrence of the conflict. And then they also go ahead, some tribes, some communities, they go ahead and sacrifice animals and say take blood, signifying that, you see, now there is peace between this community and the other community. So we don't want you to have conflicts within the two communities. So here we are bringing peace as we slaughter this animal. They take blood, they exchange, they do some exchanges of the blood. So that's part of the rituals.
Has an underground rebellious community or population begun, like, in response to the oppression, to where they're having like educational discussions? Because I know one of the biggest forms of oppression is to keep the people uneducated. And like, for example, the gentleman from the university where he was persecuted at the university, I guess being as an ambassador because he had won the political, his political class, I guess, on the university. Because like in other countries, rebellions start. Like, for example, in the Philippines, there's the New People's Army, where they live in the mountains, they're guerrillas, and they try to combat like their own creation of militia. Is that what's also happening in Kenya, or is it difficult because of the way it's structured, like the 42 tribes, that it's hard to, sorry, it's really long.
Sure. Yeah, it did happen some years back, where now some of the students who failed, okay, not only the students who failed their rights could not be, they could not be allowed to express themselves freely. So they had to, most of them went to exiles outside, then tried possibly to form certain small movements, not really rebellious movements or kind of armed conflicts. I mean, the really use of arms, but kind of movements to put pressure to the government. So much of those actors used methods of exerting pressure using other forums, international forums, to put to the government. So to date, the only kind of groups we have, much of the groups we have on the ground that have become reactive is just an extension of the political wing of certain individuals. So because somebody wants to, to address his political agenda, he comes and convinces a number of the youth or a certain number of people to his ideals that, you see, our community is being finished, it's being eliminated, so why don't we come together and have a small kind of militia group? So there hasn't been that kind of rebellion, generalized rebellion among the tribe, because trying to put the 42 tribes together to have a common rebellion is very hard.
Sure. Since the British government is responsible for dismantling the country and causing many of the ills and providing a blueprint for subsequent corrupt governors which modeled them, has the British government made any attempts, either from in the way of reparations / mental health / social work, resources to try to help with the reconciliation and to try to do something in the way of assisting to undo some of the damage that's been done in this recent 50-year past? It seems like everything ties directly back to that time frame. Sure. And the atrocities that were committed by the British. And so the corrupt governments that are in place and that are doing things now with independence, under the umbrella of independence, yes, there's a responsibility there for them to take some responsibility and acknowledge things. But then against the British government, it seems like they're walking away scotch-free and they're not in this conversation. They should be a part of this conversation if true healing is to take place. Are there any discussions about any of that? How do Kenyans feel about that?
Okay, there has been an initiative to raise this concern to the British government of the past atrocities committed during the pre-colonial days. So some Kenyans have come up, those who were initially in the struggle, the elders, sort of, because that period, 1960s. So most of them came together and formed some association and used some attorneys to travel to Britain to try to raise the case and question that these past injustices that the British government committed to them and the community should actually be, the British government should take charge and either possibly compensate the entire community. So there is that move going on now. Yeah.
Such a small segment of the population being the elite or ruling classes, what does the tax structure look like? Is there money coming in for social programs for all the people in poverty, or?
Now, what this small percent of the ruling class have done, they have used a system whereby much of the controls of the system, in terms of taxation, in terms of revenues of the government, in terms of offering certain resources, is just entwined into this small clique of people. So what happens, what is now currently happening is the civil society is also coming up maybe from a different perspective, from a different angle, initiate to source for ways of trying to bring parities between that widening gap within the communities. So there's been pressure from the civil society to ensure that that gap, where even the ruling class has taken the initiative of controlling much of the resources, is pushed down, and there is a possibility that it could still work through the reforms And that's why the ruling class is very much, opposed to quick reforms, because they know when these reforms occur, part of whatever, much of the power, much of the wealth they have amassed may be redistributed to the larger part of the community. Sure.
Because Kenya is collaborating with the U.S. and other countries as far as techniques, are you guys like since there's different tribes, are you taking aspects of their customs and implementing events and practices from here as far as the social psychosocial healing? And have you seen effectiveness in using our techniques or other countries?
Yeah, we are trying. What's happening currently is the civil society. Much of it is initiating ways of the process of healing, the societal healing, by going out, trying to get possibly the experts in terms of professionals who are able to assist in certain fields of, say, trauma healing, medication, and other aspect of social, bringing people back to the social life. So there has been that pressure to ensure that the ideas are borrowed, the technical aspect is borrowed, so that it can come down to the ground within the community and be put into place and assist the people on the ground. Sure.
What support, where does the support come from for the truth and reconciliation process? Is there support from the current government for this, or is it from some other political base in Kenya? Is the government opposed to this process?
Now, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was initiated through a legislation, a Kenyan parliamentary system legislation, after the pressure of the 2007 conflicts, where it was part of, it was called Agenda 4. So it was part of the consensus that for Kenyans to have a step, to take a step towards a national healing, then the Truth and Justice Commission has to be instituted to allow that process to take off, and it had to be legalized so that by it means there is some funding, at least. There are even other organizations which have opted to ensure that this Truth and Justice Commission kicks off, and in one way the government has also chipped in to ensure that it does not fail, because to the government it feels it is worth having that as a quick way of rehabilitating its members of the society back to where it was before.
Who are the bodies of ICC, and how will they determine who will be tried? And is there a time that's been slated? Do they even know when they're going to begin to try perpetrators?
I think as I'm talking now, the ICC Prosecutor is in Kenya through the invitation of the Kenyan government. So there is that commitment. There's that commitment through the pressure from the civil society, through the pressure from the citizens, that Kenyans have tried to initiate, say, local tribunals, but they have never taken off. So they feel that at least with the hand of the ICC, it is the general feelings of the Kenyan that it takes off, so that, because some of this clique, the clique that participated in organizing violence is a very powerful clique. So the government alone cannot, in one way, be able to take on them, because some of them are within the government system. Some of them are already ministers. So there is that fear that you see if you take on them, it may again raise another conflict. So they feel they should have a neutral person to come and take an initiative of initiating a litigation system. Yeah, sure.
In South Africa, the Youth Reconciliation Commission has made my judgment too. They did not focus on punishment and trial, and it was reported that this is what made it so successful. They focused on the discussion of the perpetrators, which gets back to the question you raised. What is realistic and what can government really have control of to bring about the healing? And I'm wondering if this is being considered in Kenya.
Now already there is a debate in Kenya over the Truth and Justice Commission. And the major concern of the citizen is its composition. They are questioning, they are saying, how come some of those commissioners who have been appointed are the same people who are in the regime that carried out a lot of atrocities? So some of the citizens are saying we need a neutral team of experts, a neutral team of commissioners who can come out and, take off this Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So as we are talking now, there is a lot of question over the credibility of some of the commissioners. They are saying, are they really credible to take on a reconciliation when they themselves were in the previous government at the policy level and they could not assist? They could not question that government that whatever it was doing was wrong.
Does Kenya have a religion or recognized religious practice, like Christianity, Muslim, or anything like that?
Yeah, Kenya has.
What's the common religion?
Kenya has a multi-religion. It's kind of it has the freedom. I mean, the law allows people to come up with religions.
Practice.
So you have several religions in the country.
The reason I'm asking is I'm wondering, and it goes along with a couple of their questions, is in South Africa with Bishop Desmond Tutu, you had their Truth and Reconciliation seemed to be sort of a Christian grace, forgiveness-based type of model. So I'm wondering how that works in Kenya with, 48 tribes?
42.
42, sorry. 42 different tribes. How does that fit? Is with the grace, forgiveness, with the natural beliefs and practices?
Yeah, as I said, there is still a debate over first the composition, and second its approach to initiating a reconciliation. They are even saying if the perpetrators have not been identified, and then here you are telling people to come and to reconcile, and the first step has not been done. So most Kenyans are saying, let's see first some process of impunity being handled, then we shall accept what? Reconciliation. Then we shall accept the process of sitting together, using other mechanisms to bring a healing within the community. Yeah. So the aspect of using churches, say trying to convince people to, to come together, to reconcile, has not taken off because they are saying much of it, they want first to see some of the perpetrators taken into, prosecuted first, before that process takes off. And that's in fact the worry, whether it will take off or not.
Yeah. I'm going to go back to the political structure. How are the individuals in government elected? Or are they elected?
Okay, Kenya has an electoral process whereby we have elections after 5 years. And within these elections, we have, at the top, we have the president, then we have members of parliament, then we have councillors at the law level. So the elections are done once, involving all this team of people. And I think within the reforms they are questioning that maybe that is the reason that caused more problems, because when the elections of the three hierarchies are held at once, concurrently, then there could be a problem. So there is a suggestion that they possibly change one set of election, possibly of a president, to be done differently from the other members of parliament and the lower level of councillors. Yeah.
So with that, with the 42 tribes, is it one vote to vote in, or are the representatives of elders? I mean, how, because I'm trying to get the distributions of power and how they are put into power, how they're put into power in relationship to the people. Because it sounds dictatorial. Are they, once they're elected, they are in that office for life, or they can get voted out of the office by the people?
Yeah, they can be voted out by the people. And of course, as I said, election is done every after 5 years.
Ah, fine, okay.
And it's only one vote, one person does the voting.
Okay.
Yes. Yes, sir.
I had a question, because during the documentary and then during your presentation as well, continue hearing the concept of community and healing. So my question is, we see similar paradigms in countries that are either isolated politically, isolated culturally. So my question is, in all these years, how do we heal a community that has been raised and knows no difference? How do we go out? Because I think there was a statement, you know, how do we, about healing a community? So if I'm looking at an entire generation that has seen so much pain and torture, how do we go about healing not the one person, but the entire community?
Okay, I think the process has already started, because Kenyans feel the moment there are several structures that have been put in place that will enable that kind of healing to take off. For instance, they are looking at it from the perspective of what will the ICC do? That's one step, one phase. Then they are looking at the reforms. They are saying now, within a specific time, we need some constitutional reforms. So that one again will combine with the first step that when the ICC is in place, it has taken some, action against the perpetrators. Then we have the constitutional reforms. Then we have, another, possibly a tribunal, a local tribunal being formed to try now the smaller perpetrators. So it indicates actually within that structure that there is a possibility healing may take off.
I'm trying to get a sense of how many perpetrators we're talking about. Over the years, the political elite has made use of some sort of instrument of repression. Has it been a secret police, or the military, or a national police force? And what kinds of numbers are we talking? How many people participated in this repression?
Sure. Now, given the phases I gave in the repression system, where we had the governments, different regimes, each regime was using its own tactic of repressing. There are those who use the police openly. There is a regime that used the military openly. Then there is one that changed tact, and on realizing a lot of pressure coming out saying, because there was, when the police were carrying out extrajudicial killings, like now the current regime, it became open that everyone knew the police are they're carrying out extrajudicial killings, and this is coming possibly from the authority, I mean the order from somebody within the authority. So there has been that question of, if the police are doing that kind of thing, then we should have a total overhaul, a total reform of the way the police is structured in Kenya. And then another regime just used secret agents who used just to come and round up people secretly without, you know, a person you could not know who is this one, but at the end ended up in certain torture chambers. So each regime used its own tactics, but at least the perpetrators who were in one way or another connected to the entire system. Some could come out openly, you could see this is a policeman. Okay, when there is a military operation, you could see this is actually a military operation. But you see, possibly they were not following the required standards of, you know, carrying out the operation. It's the feeling that whoever did that act and the kind of laws we have, which now we are really advocating to ensure that, you know, we have some reforms, could allow, even if it's some time, because when you limit the evidence to that level, then you're also limiting justice to be done wherever there is that crime committed. Sure.
So are these women still marriageable?
Yeah, in a society, there is that acceptance. There's that acceptance, yeah.
Well, I do want to thank Mr. Taiga for being here.
A ravaged state such as Kenya cannot be recreated without an agenda for transitional justice to end public corruption and prevent human rights abuses. But transitional justice cannot be achieved unless the mistakes and atrocities of the past are properly, fairly, and comprehensively investigated, the perpetrators held accountable, and the victims recognized and their dignity restored.
Torture, murder, rape, those are gross violations of the right of human beings to live in peace, security, and without fear, and to enjoy life.
Majority of the people, to keep them in place, you have to be violent. You have to detain them. You have to torture them. You have to hunt them down. And that is what has happened and will continue happening until we address the social, economic issues in this country.
We are in the mess we are in today because of what our leaders did against our country and against their own people.
It means 3 governments that have been here, Kenyatta, Moi, and now Kibaki, have not acknowledged that the purpose for which people fought has not yet been achieved. And therefore, until we admit that we need to go back to where exactly the problem is, we are unlikely to resolve these issues. And that's why after the 2008 explosion, everybody talked about historical injustices.
The Unturned Stones is a 4-part documentary on impunity and historical injustices in Kenya. It captures the patterns of human rights violations and economic crimes from the colonial era to modern Kenya. In this episode, we will follow the pattern of political repression, extrajudicial killings, and gender injustices.
Political violence in our country is as old as colonialism and as old as independent African governments. Because the colonial regime established a system under which Africans were the oppressed majority in this country.
Between 1895 and 1963, the British government committed massive political repression, extrajudicial killings, and rape. The Mau Mau atrocities committed between 1952 to 1957 marked the epitome of British acts of impunity in Kenya. The natives had to endure pain, suffering, and trauma of unimaginable brutality.
Hasa kama wewe unashikwa, unapigwa, unawekwa kwa maji, unachukuliwa wakati unashikwa tena unakwenda unafungwa kwa miti, kichwa naangalia chini, unakaa huko kama masaa 4 au masaa 6. Mwisho yake tena unageuzwa unafanywa namna hiyo. Wanawake wanachukuliwa wanawekwa chupa kwa ile hali yao ya asili na kupigiliwa.
In the Kenyatta era, the new rulers sustained the repressive practices adopted and implemented by their colonial predecessors in the spirit of we shall forgive but not forget.
In 1969, I was a student in Korea, and when I came back, I was arrested by a special branch serving under the first regime. And then later on, I was charged with a crime of sedition and sentenced on 28th April 1969 to 4 years imprisonment.
Well, I have never approved of any violence at all.
The Moi era was no different. To keep the leash on, foes at bay and stay in control, atrocities were the easier way out. It was truly an era of fuatanyayo, entrenching impunity to deeper levels.
The torture that I felt most, in a very protracted way, was the idea of being denied food. The second was, of course, beatings. Those fellows beat you till you call your mother in your mother tongue.
Who told you we tortured somebody? Have you gone to Nyayo house yourself?
Despite promises to bring an end to impunity, the Kibaki era also perpetuated this vice.
My government will adhere to the principles and practice of the rule of law.
In the spirit of Kazi Iendele, what was perpetuated by previous regimes was once again embraced. The 2008 Operation Okoa Maisha, Operation Rescue Life, that was meant to rescue the residents of Mount Elgon from the impunity of the Sabaot Land Defense Force, led to further human rights violations by the state security machinery.
Na kabla jeshi hawajakuja, polisi pia walikuwa wameanza mauaji. Na mpaka sasa vijana wakaona hakuna protection kwa upande ya serikali, polisi haiwapei protection yote. Sasa wakaona wale hata ni afadhali juu ukijiunga na wao hawata kuumiza kuliko ukijisalimisha kwa polisi tena unaumizwa zaidi. Sasa wengi wakajoin ile militia group, sio kwa kupenda lakini kwa kuhofia madhara ile wanafanywa na polisi.
Political repression, extrajudicial killings and rape have been the order of the day in Kenya's political history and development. These have led to such violations such as torture, detentions, enforced exiles, gender-based violence, among others. These acts have been perpetuated by state security agencies and at times use of militia to disguise the state's involvement.
President Kenyatta inherits a colonial regime which had taken away the most important resource from our people. And himself, instead of introducing a new dispensation which is going to give our people opportunity to own Kenya, he comes up with the same colonial mode of production where Lord Delamere is replaced by Lord Kenyatta. And that is what has caused the problem. And you can see other people have come. If it is Moi, President Moi, he will say that he will follow in the footsteps of Kenyatta, so perpetuating colonialism. President Kibaki will tell you the same thing. Kazi iendelee.
for me, is a sign that we are a violent nation. Inherently, each of us is very violent. Psychologically, we have not resolved these things because I guess we would only be able to resolve them if there was a strong political will.
The number of people who have had to endure atrocities through the various regimes are numerous. While many victims, families and communities have suffered in silence, gagged by the very state that has committed and perpetuated these atrocities, others have chosen to come out of their cocoon and share their stories. Koiki Wamwere's long struggle for democratic space is just one of the many stories that exemplifies the government's exercise of atrocities on its citizens. He has seen the inside of prisons, both during the Kenyatta and Moi eras.
I was brought a warning that I had been given a chance to be in parliament and I had refused to it. I had been put into detention, I had refused to reform, to change. Now they were going to crush me. So clearly, my entire system told me this is not an idle warning. These people mean to kill me. And we sat as a family and decided the best option was actually to go into exile, of course, which lasted many years.
This is just the tip of Koigi's ordeal. He is just one of the many victims who were frequent guests of the state.
These are scars that were inflicted on me during the beating in 1972 by Kenyatta regime. On both legs, they were trying to kill me. They hit me on the neck several times. I'm lucky to be alive today.
When atrocities and human rights violations are committed by the state, not only are the individuals affected, but also families and communities bear the brunt.
Ilikuwa saa 2 usiku. Tukasikia mlio wa silent. Tukasikia watu wanagonga mlango na tukafungua. Mamangu ndiye alifungua mlango. Tukaona mabunduki gunpoint. Saizo baba tukaona babangu ameingizwa jikoni. Tuko tunasikia babangu akigongwa na ana scream. Akiscream, mamangu ana scream. Mamangu naye anagongwa. Na sisi tuna scream. Yaani siwezi hata kutaka kuongea sana kwa sababu siwezi hata, it's hurting.
In 1987, Wafula Buke was a young mind at the University of Nairobi. He and his colleagues ran for student leadership to seek a platform to voice displeasure about the day's political leadership. Little did they know what would befall them and close associates for the rest of their lives.
After giving what was said to be very fair speeches, after being elected, 2 days later, we all had knocks at our door in various ways. So the next thing I find myself in your house and I'm being asked how many times I met the Libyan ambassador. And so the process begins.
Sometimes this violence takes a different tack and leaves more than physical scars. It also preys on the psychological. During the 2008 post-election skirmishes, Esther Wairimu, who lived in Kibera, was violated by police officers, agents of the very administration that was meant to protect her.
Wakapiga mlango mara 2, ya 3 inafunguka. Sasa mmoja anasimama hapa kwa mlango, lakini wa 3 ndio waliingia. Nikasukuliwa kwa kitanda na nikatolewa nguo ya ndani. Haya, mimi ninabaki kwa kitanda. Nikasirai, sikuamka tena.
Gender violence is a most extreme form of degradation that you can subject another human being to. So the message first is to the community with which the aggressor is at war, and then the one who pays the price is the individual victim, to emotionally break that community.
Instead of training our police to be super investigators of crime, we train them to shoot to kill. So what do we have? Over 1,000 cases of extrajudicial killings. We then get a society that sees its police so brutal. And if police are who you go to for assistance, but this is how brutal they are, why would you bother to go to them? So psychologically, we are creating a society that is totally disrespectful of human life.
For victims and their families, they not only experience physical and psychological trauma, but also their lives are disrupted forever beyond repair.
Of course, when you go into exile, first of all, the first thing that happens is disruption of the family. The family lives apart. The second thing is that you are alone, and that is in itself a kind of torture.
Unajua vile walishika babangu, walimpeleka Nyayo House. After hapo wakamfunga. Na yeye ndiye alikuwa breadwinner. Alikaa 5 years in jail. Hata vile alitoka jela kuja angeweza kutusaidia. Kwa sababu kila kitu yake ilikuwa imeisha. Na hapo poverty kaingia kwa hiyo boma. We didn't go to school. Hatu kusoma sisi kwetu. We didn't.
Madhara ambayo jamii ilipata ilitoka pande zote mbili. Kwanza kwa ile militia group, watu walipatwa na mambo mengi yala hawajaona. So kuna watu wameathirika kiakili sana, kwa sababu kuna maneno yale unaona yakitendeka mpaka unashindwa sasa ni upande gani utaweza kukimbilia.
The only thing that has hit me so badly is how my imprisonment hit my family. That I can't even talk about. Oh.
Violence begets more violence. For a nation that started off on the wrong foot by embracing state-instigated violence as a norm, the trend was set for its leaders and citizens to perpetuate gross human rights violations with impunity. A trend that must be broken before it destroys the country and its people.
I think every nation needs to accept its history. It needs, I hear people saying, if you do not understand your history, you really cannot be able to understand where you're going. Because that history has made us who we are.
Initially, I thought Kenyatta and Moi were particularly evil people who did the worst to their people because they were callous and heartless. But I knew later, I discovered later, it must also be blamed upon the Cold War, the Western powers that regarded themselves as bastions of democracy, but they did not want democracy for Africa. And so they advised our leaders to have this dictatorship that actually ended up giving Africa no freedom. If Africa was saved from communism, it ended up in the clutches of our worst enemy.
The buck has to stop somewhere. We have leaders in this country, and the kind of style they are leading us with is a style that is generating evil people rather than positive people. So we need to change the political culture of this country. The style with which we are governing our nation is a dangerous style, and it can only resort to what we are seeing and nothing better.
To preserve the status quo, the state has increasingly become more violent, and a few leaders, or even the clergy itself has become part of the conspiracy to keep the people in place. You can say that massacres, torture, political violence has increased fivefold, like the population.
Given the scale of historical atrocities and the magnitude, numerous victims have suffered. Justice has been elusive. To break the vicious cycle, the past must be confronted, the victims must be empowered, and the perpetrators brought to justice.
We need, therefore, as a nation, to deal immediately with the issue of impunity. We need to bring to justice people who have actually committed these atrocities. They are known because reports have been done. We need to see them in court today, not tomorrow, in Kenyan courts, so that Kenyans can actually feel and see and go through that experience, that even the most important people, so-called most important people, can be punished by our legal system. Then they will also start respecting that legal system, that if that big fish can be punished, what about me if I also commit a crime?
Criminal perpetrators of torture, criminal planners of torture, and criminal executors of torture must be made to account. No matter how long it takes, they must pay for that.
I don't want to give it to buy these lies of we can come up with a truth and justice, what. If we're not dealing with the root causes that brought the contradictions that messed us up, then we're wasting our time.
With justice begins the progression of healing. But how can the process begin if the perpetrators have never been brought to book?
I am rather disappointed that neither Kibaki, who used to supervise torture in the Nyayo House as the chairman of the National Security Council, Moi, the architect of detentions and assassinations of people, Kenyatta as the mastermind of betrayal after independence. These three persons, together with those with whom they ran their systems of dictatorship, owe us an apology. As soon as they do that, I will be willing to say I have no grudge against you as a person.
Kuongea ukweli sisi hatujawahi heal. Kwanza tuwezi heal haraka kwa sababu babangu alikufa. Hatuwezi heal.
Bado kuna shida ya kuweka watu katika maridhiano ikiwa serikali haitapeana delegation ya duties za kufanya hiyo kazi, kwa wale watu watafanya bila kupendelea upande wote. Sababu inaonekana hao watu katika bunge na serikali wanajua mambo yao. Ikifikia wakati wa kunywa chai wanakunywa pamoja. Taarifa wanatoa pamoja. Sisi kule mashinani tunaumia.
Unajua kuna wabunge walikuwa Nyayo House Torture Chambers, na vile wameingia government wametusahau na wamesahau. Unajua wamefika huko wanaona kama wamefika. Wanasahau wenye walikuwa nao.
I guess we would only be able to resolve them if there was a strong political will to help citizens move from that kind of culture to a culture where they value other human beings, irrespective of what that human being has done.
For the nation to move forward, it must cease to carry its past baggage. Individuals must seek ways to conquer their ordeals. For the perpetrators, they must come forth to confess and accept their doings if reconciliation is to be found.
If they can confess that what they did was wrong, if they can admit that what they did was not out of personal, individual malice, but it was something driven by the politics of the day, to be quite honest, I am quite willing to take them as I would soldiers in a battlefield.
You cannot reconcile people unless people feel that their hearts are now clean, that they think justice has been done.
I know I suffered immensely. That was my privilege to suffer for the country. I'm glad that we got some of what we fought for. I'm also sad because it looks to me like we are on the verge of losing it. But on the overall, I'm happy with myself. If I were to meet my maker today, it would be with the peace.
Reconciliation is very important in this process. And reconciliation can only come through a process where people feel that, you know, I now know the truth and I understand the truth. I probably understand why this person did what they did. Even the perpetrators, some of them, maybe they are tormented, they are haunted by the things they did. And I think that kind of process is a process that the religious community are better placed, in my view, because that is what they do. They administer to people's souls, they do social justice, and I think their role there is very critical.
Almost 5 decades on, after independence, there is still a lot of suffering, bitter pain and anger. The country must be exorcised of the ghosts of the past that still haunt it and ensure public accountability.
I think as Kenyans, first we should go back to pre-colonial times, before colonialism came, and try to get lessons from there. And then we should get even where things started going wrong. You know, colonialism came by force, and to colonialism, the African had no human rights.
There lacks a serious will to actually implement changes that can change this country forever towards true democracy, good governance, and therefore development.
A hungry person is an angry person. So until we look at Kenya in a more holistic way, not in the tribal way, that so long as one person is eating from a community, everybody else is happy. But we have been reduced to that circus, that cycle of, so long as your brother is eating, that is fine, you might get the crumbs from Lazarus' table. The basic issue in Kenyan society, in African society, in the world society today, is what is driven by economic empowerment. It is not where you are born, the water you drink of, and the person who brings the water to you. These are just by the way. The basic issue is whether you have education or not, whether you'll eat or not, whether when you go sick, you'll be treated in a hospital or not. These are the basic community issues across the world.
We have to come to terms with atrocities committed in the past to help us to deal with those ones which are committed in the present and to prevent future conflicts and atrocities from happening again. That reality we have to confront.
If we were a bold government willing to resolve those issues, we would be as bold to actually retrace those steps so that Kenyans can understand why it is, first of all, how we got free from British rule, and after getting free from British rule, what else Kenyans expected.
For a nation to foster democracy, rule of just laws, respect for human rights and accountability, it must deal with the past human rights violations. The Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission, TJRC, and existing court processes, among other reforms, may provide part of the mechanisms to banish impunity from Kenya. The TJRC is a temporary commission whose mandate is to gather information on historical injustices, human rights violations, economic crimes, as well as provide victims and perpetrators a platform to engage each other. But we all know that Kenya has had so many commissions of inquiry and an effective judicial system. Will these ones make a difference?
Apparently, we fought to create a climate for our enemies to help us. Now, that I don't understand how it works. I'm not a very deep student of history, but I think I have no business expecting so much from my enemy. Yeah. Anything good he does is something that is supposed to make me lower my guard and finally get finished. So not in my lifetime. I can't see these criminals in this government. And they are going to be around for some time.
Kwa hiyo commission ni nani atachakuliwa? Sababu kama bato ni wale watu serikali imewapea strategic positions ya kuchunga image ya serikali, hasa police, to investigate, prosecute na mambo kama hayo. Sasa kama hao ndio watakuja tena na hiyo nafasi ya kufanya mambo hayo katika commission, mimi naona swali hiyo kutatuliwa itakuwa ni ngumu na itakuwa ni kama bado zile commission zingine.
Nimekuja hizi seminar for the last 4 years now. Tunakuja, tunaongea, tuna waste time yetu, tuna demonstrate kwa barabara, tunapigwa na tear gas, tunaenda kwa Minister of Justice and Constitution. Minister anakataa kutuona, tunaacha petition huko, atupei feedback. So, sioni serikali kama kuna kitu imetufanyia. TJRC mimi naona kama itapeleka mambo polepole.
My view is that TJRC, as much as it's for transitional justice, the criminal perpetrators must be punished. There can be no other way. I believe that the rights of the tortured cannot be exchanged with amnesty for the torturer. They have to bear their cross.
So what I'm saying about truth and justice, it should be done by people with a sense of history, with a sense of perspective, nationhood. There are people who should not see this as a job. There are people who should see it as somebody who has got a God-given mission to look at a very aggrieved situation and do what is right.
We want to monitor this process, not only to empower people, but also to monitor it. Because if it's not properly monitored and put on the national spotlight, then, you know, it will be one of those things that, yes, we did, but, you know, those guys will come up with their report. We will not own it as a nation.
We have to change our electoral system through a constitutional change. That's why this country badly needs reforms, so that the new leadership can use a new constitution and a new set of laws, a new set of institutions that can respect that which has never been respected in this country, the human dignity of every Kenyan.
And I guess I would ask for people who are victims, I know they must feel very tired of trying to raise these issues for decades in some instances. But I think the process is not about establishing the truth just for them. So it's about building a history without the kind of silences and omissions that the current version of Kenyan history has.
As a nation, we are yet to be healed from the pain, suffering, and dreadful consequences of a history of